Hello once again from the Prim Reaper. This is a video that I've wanted to do for a long time. Now, I think the main thing that triggered this for me was not something that happened specifically to me, but to see the kinds of criticisms that Honey Badger Radio gets from various people for not doing this or that style of activism correctly. Of course, as many of you are well aware, men's issues advocacy gets a lot of flack from a lot of different people, so this should come as no surprise. But this kind of thing actually brings up a very interesting and in-depth discussion to be had, so I figured that I would start here. I'm going to be breaking this up into two videos because I'm a little overwhelmed with the last of my coursework, and I need this to be short. Like, for real short, not let's stretch this out to another half-an-hour video kind of short. Before I begin, one of my famous prefaces. These videos aren't meant to tone police. These are observations that I've had from many different spheres of experience. I respect everyone's right to say and do what they feel is best, but I absolutely think that there are going to be best practices in some regards, and these are just a few thoughts to that end. So first, let's begin with some of the ways that I've seen people criticize HBR for doing it wrong. Gonna go ahead and pass on by the "they shill too much" comments. Amazingly, they want to be able to pay their collaborators because they do this as like their job or something. I know, shocking. Now, I volunteer with them, so it's a little bit different and it doesn't apply to me, but at the same time, I have other work and other things that I'm doing, so I can't put in the same amount of time that the others do. No, the comments that I'm mainly talking about here are the ones focused on how HBR only focuses on the negative elements of what is going on in our society. That is, the ways in which men are struggling, or in which feminists or feminist organizations are saying or doing things that undermine legitimate equality for men, without also focusing on some positive steps that men can take to improve their situations. Now, I know I'm making this video for my personal channel, but several of the things that I would say to respond to detractors of HBR, I would also say as qualifications about my own videos, so here we go. First of all, there are many good reasons for exploring and even focusing on the negatives. 1. It highlights current events, which can help us to detect trends and areas where things might become a concern in the future. Look at how Gamergate started out as what many of us felt were simply totally obvious concerns about simple ethics in games journalism, and otherwise a relatively minimal incident in the grand scheme of things, but how it gradually became a serious issue when people started to use it to make all kinds of claims about sexism in the gaming industry. Look at the way the Me Too campaign has spiraled since that became a thing. Many of us, myself included, spoke about the potential for such campaigns to be abused right off the get-go. Related to this first point, 2. It helps to get information out there about why these things are a problem in ways that people might not even be realizing. Many people, including close friends of mine, were uncritically in support of #MeToo when it first came out, using it to share their stories and pushing for its use by other people. However, as I was relatively well versed in men's issues by this point, I could see from a mile away exactly why this hashtag was going to be a problem, and started a lot of conversations with people, both on this channel and off of it, about what sorts of things were to come if people didn't look critically on this movement. But of course, I'm just one person, and I obviously would not be able to stop a movement like this alone. But I got a few people to think differently about it, and when multiple people stand up to bring attention to these issues, it lends credence to the fact that this is a problem and needs to be addressed. Me Too is just one example. There are many others. 3. Focusing on the negatives shows that there are people out there noticing these issues, which demonstrates support and a safe shoulder to people who are experiencing these negative situations themselves. It's sad how often people go through the kinds of problems that we see all the time in the men's movement who have no idea how widespread and common their experiences are. I have a friend who recently lost a year of his life to dealing with a situation in which he was fielding a false accusation of sexual assault from his ex. When these issues first began, my friend cut himself off from a lot of other people and didn't talk about what he was going through with others, at times wondering if he had in fact done something wrong to deserve what he was experiencing. It wasn't until I returned to my hometown, reached out to him to go out for dinner to catch up, and talked about my involvement with the men's movement that he felt comfortable telling me about what he was going through and starting to seek support from others. I can't overstate the importance of this last point. Isolation is devastating when going through issues like these. As I mentioned with my friend, it can lead people down a path of internalizing their feelings and shutting themselves off from much-needed supports. More than that, isolation contributes to depression and anxiety and can absolutely contribute to an individual's risk of suicide, especially when paired with that nasty self-blame that I mentioned from before. Demonstrating an awareness of these issues, of knowing how they can affect people, can bring someone a lot of comfort and a better sense of understanding of what they're going through. I have seen many people write letters to HBR and myself of how the emotional supports provided in this way have helped with their emotional isolation and thoughts of suicide, and this is obviously a really, really big deal to me. Of course, this isn't all. Number 4. Knowing about the negatives can in itself offer positive ideas for people to protect or advocate for themselves. It's not just about reducing the sense of isolation for people going through these things, though that is a huge benefit. It's also about educating people going through these experiences on why their attackers might be doing this, on what they can do to protect themselves from further attacks, on what they might be able to expect going through the legal process, and on tactics that they can use to help productively deal with the fear and the stress. We would not be able to brainstorm these proactive and positive strategies without also being aware of the possible negative things to watch out for, without seeing the negative examples and experiences that other people have gone through, and without knowing the areas where they made mistakes. For another example, my series on the hijacking of higher education is talking all about my negative experiences with social justice in my program, but by talking about it like this, I can help people to be aware of what they might be getting into in higher education, and also to help empower some people who are already students to take a stand against this kind of material as well. The negatives here serve a very important purpose, which again brings me to my next point. Number 5. Facing the negatives can be uncomfortable for some people, and for those who are not currently experiencing any of the troubles that we talk about themselves, it can be frightening to know that these kinds of things can happen. But believe me when I say that it can be even more frightening for someone who is totally unaware of any of these problems to encounter them suddenly and unexpectedly. The friend I mentioned from before had absolutely no awareness of these kinds of things, and when it came up, let me just tell you that it wreaked havoc on his and his family's life. Knowledge is indeed power. Forewarned is forearmed. It's better to know what can happen and to over-prepare than to be caught off guard. And lastly, number 6, focusing on the negatives provides entertainment to some individuals. Yep, not all the goals have to be lofty ones. For a lot of people, they get entertained and amused by these topics. Some people just like to point and laugh at the stupid things that other people are doing or saying, and others just like to know that there are things in this world that are crazier than they are. Really, who is anyone else to tell them that their entertainment at these things is wrong? If pointing out the negative things going on can do everything I've already mentioned and give some people a few yucks, well, I fail to see the problem here. That's not to say that we aren't also focusing on the positives that men can look for, or on the things that they can do to help themselves. Let's explore a little bit more about that side of things and why it might not always seem as prevalent. 1. We absolutely are talking about various things that men can do, putting out shows and discussions in support of important men's issues, and putting on fundraisers for men in need when they reach out and ask it of us. As I mentioned in my last video, I'm also stepping up as a volunteer with Cafe, trying to get a new full-time center for men and families opened up here in Calgary, and I'm putting up a portion of the proceeds that I get from my Patreon towards it. I'll link both my Patreon and the Cafe fundraiser here as well. The main problem is that these videos just don't pull the same kinds of views as those other topics, but there might be a few sub-reasons for that as well. A. The positive steps that men can take that we're suggesting might not be equally applicable to all men's situations. For example, my Selecting a Counselor That Is Right for You episode, which I will shamelessly link in the corner, is going to be all but useless to people who have already given up on the mental health system. For those people who don't have money to donate to the other causes, videos asking for money might make them feel guilty or annoyed that all you're doing is asking for money all the time, especially if you're in a situation like HBR where they're trying to pay their collaborators. I find that it's not as bad on me, as I'm usually just trying to focus on other people's needs, but it's still going to be harder to draw attention to these videos when so many other people are already struggling enough as it is. B, let's be honest, these videos are just less entertaining. Honestly, it's not as fun or funny to watch people talk seriously or positively about a topic as it is to watch someone rant and swear and point out the flaws in another person's argument. I try as much as I can to make all my videos equally entertaining, throwing in skits or making self-deprecating jokes. But let's be honest, it's just easier to be funny when I'm flaying a bad SJW argument than when I'm talking about a fundraiser that needs your assistance, or telling you what to look for when you're trying to find a counselor that's compatible with you, which leads into my next main point. 2, there's always going to be a limit on what any one individual can do. For example, I trust a carpenter to build a good framework for a house, but I'm not going to trust him to work on my teeth. There's really only so much that a group of non-lawyers can say to assist men in legal cases, for example. Aside from our own, or our friends' experiences with the legal systems, none of us have the complex education required to tell people with absolute certainty how to proceed in their custody hearing or false accusation case. We can certainly tell people about our own experiences and what they look like, but given that things of this nature are highly dependent on many other factors, including the area of the world you live in, the case details, the skill of the lawyer, the disposition of the judge, your mileage may totally vary even if one of us was a lawyer and could tell you things to definitively watch out for. Could I conceivably be doing more for men? Could I have dual majored in psychology and law so that I could strive to become a lawyer-counselor combo that knows the ins and outs of mental health and custody law? I suppose it's possible that I could be doing more than I'm currently doing, but even though I am an immortal specter of death, I am nevertheless a being bound by teleological rules. No matter what, if I'm focusing my time on one thing, another thing is going to suffer. Unfortunately, there really is only so much that I can do, and being realistic with myself, I'm going to stick to the thing that calls to me the most and the place where I feel that I can be the most help. I'm not a failure to the man who is being falsely accused of sexual assault just because I'm counseling the one who's struggling with life and feels like nobody cares about him. I'm just focusing on a different area. And of course, that's not to say that I'm going to be completely useless in these areas either. Returning to my example of my friend, though I wasn't able to tell him the ins and outs of the law, I was able to help make some psychological suggestions to help him with his case. He mentioned being incredibly nervous to go and stand before a judge, so using my knowledge of systematic desensitization, I suggested that he start attending public civil court on a regular basis to become more familiar with the process and more comfortable with the proceedings. By the time his actual case came around, he was much better prepared to keep his cool and put his arguments forth in a calm and collected manner. And lastly, number 3, to bring it all around, talking about the positive strategies that men can do to care for themselves is, a lot of the time, going to require talking about some of the negative things that I mentioned before for context. So I think that about sums it all up. I can absolutely understand the mindset of people who are upset by talking about the negative things going on in the world, especially those who are not currently going through it themselves. It's scary to think about it, and it's even scarier to admit that there are ways in which you might be vulnerable. God knows I understand. But the response to these things is not to bury one's head in the sand, keep on going through life like these things don't exist, and hope that everything works itself out for those in the path of the tornado. The proper response is to talk about it, bring it to light, brainstorm strategies for dealing with things together, and yes, even get a few laughs wherever possible about some of the more absurd things going on. I'm going to go ahead and end this video here and save the other portion of my discussion for the next half. These are just some of the things that have been on my mind for a while in seeing a lot of the criticism swirling about. I think it's valuable to get the perspectives of others on what we should be doing more or less of as advocates for men's rights, but at the same time, I want to make sure that our current efforts aren't being misunderstood. In my next video, I'll be talking a little bit more about communication techniques for reaching out and connecting with different kinds of people and trying to build more bridges and positive understanding, so those who are concerned about too much negativity should be happy to see it. In the meantime, thanks so much for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next one.